The conquistadors also carried a matchlock musket that shot a solid lead ball. Not very accurate, but deadly at close range. Another specialty weapon was the crossbow. Now, a crossbow like this could fire a bolt out to an effective range of 100 yards or more. Cortés had special units of conquistadors who were assigned just to load these weapons, and he had other units assigned just to fire them. With these weapons at his disposal, Cortés met members of the Mayan tribe. These Mayans told Cortés where he could find a Spaniard named Aguilar.
Several years before Cortés's expedition, there was a shipwreck, and one of the surviving members, a man named Aguilar, was taken captive by the Maya and learned Yucatec Maya. And when Cortés's expedition came along, they realized that he could translate for them from Maya into Spanish.
With Aguilar on board, Cortés sailed around the Yucatan coast to the Mayan town of Potonchan, arriving there around 22 March 1519. The natives of this town had given gold to the leader of an earlier Spanish expedition. Cortés hoped for a similar reception. The chief stalled for 3 days, ignoring Cortés's request to come ashore. While the chief prepared for battle, the Spaniards were forced to sit on their ships and wait. Now, Cortés was tired of waiting for an invitation into Potonchan. He readied all his men and their weapons, the crossbows, the muskets, and the cannons. But for sheer innovation, shock value, and usefulness, nothing beats these next two secret weapons. And this was Cortés's first secret weapon, a bull mastiff. Trained to kill and often outfitted with their own suits of armor, war dogs were shocking to the natives. They'd never seen dogs trained to attack men. Cortés's other secret weapon was the horse. He was the first Spaniard to bring them to the New World. Now, he only brought a dozen or so, but on the battlefield they made all the difference. The natives thought his horses were dragons. On the battlefield, that was a distinct psychological advantage. The Mayan warriors were no match for the modern conquistadors on horseback. They thought the horse and rider were one divine being.
The native peoples were terrified of the horses. They had never seen anything like it before.
Cortés followed with the firing of his cannons. The Mayans were frightened but continued fighting. Then Cortés ordered a rear flank attack, and the bloody battle came to an end. Cortés then collected his spoils of war. In defeat, the natives of Potonchan brought Cortés gifts of food, gold, and most significantly, 20 women. These included one woman the natives called Malinale or Malinche. The Spaniards would christen her Doña Malina. Her language skills would prove invaluable to Cortés and his conquest.
She joins the ranks of the Spaniards as a sexual object. Only she has a great advantage over the other women. She knows Nahuatl and Maya.
Doña Marina knew the languages of the Aztec and the Mayan empires. Cortés suddenly had an important tool of conquest, the ability to communicate. Through Aguilar, he could speak to Doña Marina, and through Doña Marina, he could speak to the Aztecs. With his newfound translators on board, Cortés pressed on. He decided his march on Montezuma should begin further north. So, in April 1519, he sailed across the Gulf of Mexico to present-day Veracruz. At Veracruz, Cortés met natives forced to pay taxes to the Aztec Empire and to Montezuma.
Cortés immediately was aware that these people were not happy, and so he had an inkling that perhaps this empire was more vulnerable than he had thought previously.
This vulnerability was good news for Cortés. He would have to exploit every weakness to take down Montezuma. Included in Montezuma's empire were over 9 major ethnic groups. The emperor had a firm grasp on the Valley of Mexico, and his power spread out from there. When the Aztecs first came to the Valley of Mexico at the end of the 12th century, they were a band of people without a home. Their gods instructed them to build their new home on the site where they saw an eagle sitting on a cactus with a serpent in his mouth. Modern-day Mexico City occupies the spot where Montezuma consolidated his power in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Built as an island in the middle of a lake, the city appeared to be as impregnable as it was beautiful.
The Aztecs emerged as an empire in 1427. They only really began their major expansion in the mid-15th century. And as they expanded out, they had a series of peoples they had overcome.
To control his empire, Montezuma had spies everywhere. He'd been tracking Cortés since the conquistador landed in Mexico. This sort of intel was critical. Montezuma needed to know every shifty move this conquistador made. Knowing the Spaniards had a great lust for gold and gems, Montezuma sent an emissary with gifts for Cortés. Montezuma hoped these gifts would pacify the conqueror. He pledged continued gifts on one condition: that Cortés stop his march and not come to the capital, Tenochtitlan. The emissary reported to Montezuma that Cortés was coming anyway. He told him that Cortés wished to pay tribute to the great Montezuma in person, and he would bring his army of conquistadors, their guns, their loud cannons, their immortal horses, and their demonic dogs. On paper, the Spaniards should not have been a threat to Montezuma. Cortés had an army of barely 500 men compared to hundreds of thousands of Aztec warriors. And yet, Montezuma feared Cortés. Cortés had arrived during a season when the Aztec calendar didn't allow Montezuma to wage or even prepare for war.
Because the Aztecs really went to war from early December until April during the dry season after the harvest. So he hadn't raised the armies, retrained the armies, stored all the food. He wasn't prepared for war.
In addition, Cortés had arrived during a sacred year on the Aztec calendar, the year when the Aztec god called Quetzalcoatl was supposed to return. An ancient prophecy foretold that the bearded and feathered god Quetzalcoatl would return on a ship from the east to take back and rule the land of the Aztecs. Cortés came from the east. He was bearded, and he arrived in early 1519, roughly equivalent to the year and date in the Aztec prophecy. Montezuma thought Cortés was a god. Montezuma thought he was immortal, that he couldn't be killed. That was a weapon even Cortés couldn't have dreamed of. By August of 1519, Cortés and his men were camped less than 200 miles from Tenochtitlan. Montezuma and his lords debated their next move.
There were councils held in Tenochtitlan about what to do, and there was great division within the ruling elite. Should they go down there and just watch? Should they send an army and drive them back into the sea? Should they trade with them? No one really knew.
Half the nobles of Tenochtitlan were adamant about fighting Cortés. They believed this brazen Spaniard should be dealt with swiftly and violently. But the final decision was Montezuma's to make. So far, Hernán Cortés's conquest of Mexico was going very well. He'd suffered minimal casualties, and he'd acquired translators to help him communicate in country. But he might have another problem: mutiny.